Welcome back to Footnotes Folly, and to Josephus' Antiquities. I am Pemberton. This is Book 4, Part 2. The wondering is over, the fighting begins. We watch the Hebrews ask peaceful passage through the land of the Amorites, be refused, and then break the armies of two kings, Sihon of Heshbon, and Og of Bashan, a giant of a man whose iron bed Josephus pauses to measure. Their lands east of the Jordan become the first inheritance. Then comes one of the most curious stories ever told. Balak, king of Moab, terrified of this advancing nation, sends for a famous prophet named Balaam to lay a curse on them. What follows the reluctant prophet, the warning on the road, the altars built again and again in the high places, ends with Balaam blessing the very people he was paid to damn, and then, more cynically, teaching Balak how to ruin them without a curse at all. That counsel leads straight into the war with the Midianites, with which the part closes. Let us take up the story.
People mourned for Aaron for 30 days. When the mourning was over, Moses moved the army from that place and came to the river Arnon. This river comes out of the mountains of Arabia, runs through the whole wilderness, and flows into the lake Asphaltitis. It forms the boundary between the land of the Moabites and the land of the Amorites. The land is fruitful and produces enough good things to support a great number of people. Moses therefore sent messengers to Sihon, the king of that country, asking him to grant the army passage on whatever security Sihon chose to require. Moses promised that no injury would be done either to the country Sihon ruled or to its inhabitants. He also promised to buy provisions at whatever price would be to their advantage, even if Sihon wanted to sell them the very water they drank. But Sihon refused the offer. He arranged his army for battle and prepared everything so that he could prevent the Hebrews from crossing the Arnon. When Moses saw that the Amorite king was ready to begin hostilities against them, he thought he ought not to endure that insult. He also intended to wean the Hebrews from their lazy temper and prevent the disorders that arose from it, which had been the occasion of their former sedition. Indeed, even now their minds were not entirely at ease. So he asked God whether he would allow him to fight. When he had done this, and God also promised him victory, Moses himself became very courageous and ready to proceed to battle. He encouraged the soldiers and urged them to take pleasure in fighting now that God had given them permission to do so. When the Hebrews received this permission, which they had greatly longed for, they put on all their armor and set to work without delay. But the Amorite king was no longer like himself once the Hebrews were ready to attack him. He himself was frightened by them, and his army, which had previously shown good courage, now proved timid. They could not withstand the first assault or hold their ground against the Hebrews, but fled away. They thought flight would offer a better chance of escape than fighting, for they relied on their strong cities. Yet they gained no advantage from those cities when they were forced to flee toward them. As soon as the Hebrews saw them giving way, they immediately pursued them closely. When they had broken their ranks, they terrified them greatly, and some of the Amorites separated from the rest and ran toward the cities. The Hebrews pursued them vigorously and kept at the work they had already undertaken with steady persistence. They were very skilled with slings, very dexterous at throwing darts and any other weapons of that kind, and they wore only light armor, which made them swift in pursuit. They overtook their enemies. Those who were farther away and could not be caught were reached by slings and bows, so that many were killed. Those who escaped the slaughter were badly wounded. These men were more distressed by thirst than by any of those who fought against them, for it was summer. When the greatest number of them came down to the river because they longed to drink, and when others fled away in groups, the Hebrews surrounded them and shot at them. With darts and arrows they slaughtered them all. Sihon, their king, was also killed. So the Hebrews stripped the dead bodies and took their spoil. The land they captured was also full of abundant fruits, and the army went through it without fear and fed their cattle on it. They also took the enemy people prisoner, for nothing could stop them now that all the fighting men had been destroyed. Such was the destruction that overtook the Amorites, who were neither wise in counsel nor brave in action. After this the Hebrews took possession of their land. It was a country situated between 3 rivers and naturally resembled an island. The river Arnon marked its southern side. The river Jabbok determined its northern side. It runs into Jordan, loses its own name, and takes the others. Jordan itself runs along its western coast. When matters had reached this state, Og, the king of Gilead and Golanitis, attacked the Israelites. He brought an army with him, coming in haste to help his friend Sihon. Although he found Sihon already slain, he still resolved to come and fight the Hebrews. He supposed he would be too strong for them and desired to test their courage. But his hope failed. He himself was killed in the battle, and all his army was destroyed. Moses then crossed the river Jabbok and overran the kingdom of Og. He overthrew their cities and killed all their inhabitants, who exceeded all the people in that part of the continent in wealth because of the goodness of the soil and the great quantity of their riches. Og had very few equals either in the size of his body or the handsomeness of his appearance. He was also very active with his hands, so that his deeds matched the vast size and handsome appearance of his body. Men could easily judge his strength and magnitude when they took his bed at Rabbath, the royal city of the Ammonites. It was made of iron, its breadth was 4 cubits, and its length was a cubit more than double its breadth. Yet Og's fall did not only improve the Hebrew circumstances for the present. By his death he also became the cause of further success for them, for they immediately took the 60 cities that had been subject to him, all surrounded with excellent walls, and everyone, both collectively and individually, gained great spoil. When Moses had brought his army to Jordan, he pitched his camp in the great plain opposite Jericho. This city has a very favorable situation, and is especially suited for producing palm trees and balsam. By now the Israelites had begun to be very proud of themselves, and were very eager to fight. After Moses had spent a few days offering sacrifices of thanksgiving to God and feasting the people, he sent a party of armed men to lay waste the country of the Midianites and take their cities. The occasion he had for making war on them was as follows. Balak, king of the Moabites, had inherited from his ancestors a friendship and alliance with the Midianites. When he saw how powerful the Israelites had become, he was greatly frightened for the safety of himself and his kingdom. He did not know that the Hebrews would not interfere with any other country, but were to be satisfied with possession of the land of Canaan, since God had forbidden them to go any farther. So, acting with more haste than wisdom, he decided to make an attempt against them by words. He did not think it wise to fight them after they had enjoyed such prosperous successes, and had even come out of misfortunes happier than before. But he thought he might hinder them, if he could, from growing greater. Therefore he resolved to send ambassadors to the Midianites about them. The Midianites knew of Balaam, who lived by the Euphrates and was the greatest prophet at that time, and who was also their friend. They sent some of their honorable princes along with Balak's ambassadors, to beg the prophet to come to them and call down curses for the destruction of the Israelites. Balaam received the ambassadors and treated them very kindly. After supper he asked what God's will was and what matter had led the Midianites to ask him to come to them. But when God opposed his going, Balaam came to the ambassadors and told them that he himself was very willing and eager to grant their request, but that God was opposed to his intention. This was the same God who had raised Balaam to great reputation because of the truth of his predictions. Balaam told them that the army they wanted him to curse was favored by God. For that reason, he advised them to go home again and not persist in their hostility against the Israelites. After giving them this answer, he dismissed the ambassadors. At Balak's urgent request and fervent entreaties, the Midianites sent other ambassadors to Balaam. Wanting to please the men, Balaam again asked God. But God was displeased at the second trial and ordered him not to contradict the ambassadors. Balaam did not realize that God gave this command in order to deceive him, so he went with the ambassadors. On the way, the divine angel met him in a narrow passage hemmed in by a wall on both sides. The ass on which Balaam rode understood that a divine spirit had met him and pushed Balaam against one of the walls, ignoring the blows that Balaam gave her after he was hurt by the wall. When the angel continued to distress her, and Balaam continued to strike her, the ass fell down by the will of God. Then she used the voice of a man and complained that Balaam was acting unjustly toward her. She said that, though he had never before had any fault to find with her service, he now beat her because he did not understand that she was being hindered by the providence of God from serving him in what he was now going about. Balaam was disturbed because the ass spoke with a human voice. Then the angel appeared plainly to him, blamed him for the blows he had given his ass, and told him that the brute creature was not at fault, but that he himself had come to obstruct Balaam's journey because it was contrary to the will of God. Balaam was afraid and prepared to go back. Yet God urged him to continue the journey he had intended, but added this command: he was to declare nothing except what God himself suggested to his mind. After God gave him this charge, Balaam came to Balak. The king entertained him magnificently, and then asked him to go to one of the mountains, to view the condition of the camp of the Hebrews. Balak himself came to the mountain as well, bringing the prophet with him in royal attendance. This mountain stood above them, and was 60 furlongs from the camp. When Balaam saw the Hebrews, he asked the king to build him 7 altars and bring him 7 bulls and 7 rams. The king immediately did as he asked. Balaam then killed the sacrifices and offered them as burnt offerings, so that he might observe some sign of the Hebrews' flight. Happy is this people, on whom God bestows possession of innumerable good things and grants his own providence to be their helper and guide. There will be no nation among mankind that is not judged inferior to you in virtue, in the earnest pursuit of the best rules of life, and in rules that are pure from wickedness. You will leave those rules to your excellent children, because of God's regard for you and because he provides such things for you as may make you happier than any other people under the sun. You shall retain the land to which he has sent you, and it shall always be under the command of your children. All the earth as well as the seas shall be filled with your glory. You shall be numerous enough to supply the world in general, and every region of it in particular with inhabitants from your stock. Yet, O blessed army, marvel that you have become so many from one father. Truly, the land of Canaan can now contain you, since you are still comparatively few. But know that the whole world is proposed as your place of habitation forever. The multitude of your descendants shall live both in the islands and on the continent, and they shall be more numerous than the stars of heaven. When you become so many, God will not abandon his care for you, but will give you an abundance of all good things in times of peace, and victory and dominion in times of war. May the children of your enemies desire to fight against you, and may they be bold enough to take up arms and assault you in battle, for they will not return with victory, nor will their return be pleasant to their children and wives. To such a high degree of valor you will be raised by the providence of God, who is able to diminish the abundance of some and supply the needs of others. Balaam spoke these words by inspiration, not by his own power, but because he was moved to say them by the divine Spirit. Balak was displeased and said that Balaam had broken the agreement he had made. He had come, as Balak and his confederates had invited him, on the promise of great gifts. But instead of cursing their enemies, he had praised them and declared them the happiest of men. Balaam answered Balak by saying that, if he considered the whole matter rightly, he could not suppose it was in their power either to be silent or to say anything when the Spirit of God seized them. God put whatever words he pleased into their mouths, and discourses of which they themselves were not conscious. Balaam said he well remembered the entreaties by which Balak and the Midianites had joyfully brought him there, and that for that reason he had taken the journey. He had prayed that he might not offend them in what they desired of him. But God was more powerful than the purposes Balaam had formed to serve them. Those who undertake to foretell the affairs of mankind as if from their own abilities are entirely unable either to do it, or to refrain from uttering what God suggests to them, or to force his will. When God prevents them and enters into them, nothing they say is their own. Balaam said that he had not intended to praise the army, or to go through the several good things God intended to do for their race. But because God was so favorable to them, and so ready to give them a happy life and eternal glory, God had suggested the declaration of those things to him. Yet because Balaam desired to oblige Balak as well as the Midianites, whose entreaties it was not proper for him to reject, he proposed that they again raise other altars, and offer the same sacrifices as before, so that he might see whether he could persuade God to allow him to bind these men with curses. Balak agreed, but even after the second sacrifices, God would not consent to Balaam's cursing the Israelites. Then Balaam fell on his face and foretold the calamities that would befall the several kings of the nations and the most eminent cities, some of which in old times were not even inhabited. These events have come to pass among the several peoples concerned, both in former ages, and in this one, down to my own memory, both by sea and by land. From the fulfillment of all these predictions that he made, one may easily suppose that the rest will be fulfilled in time to come. O Balak, and you Midianites who are present here, for I am obliged to gratify you even without the will of God, it is true that no complete destruction can seize the nation of the Hebrews, not by war, not by plague, not by scarcity of the fruits of the earth, nor can any other unexpected accident entirely ruin them. The providence of God is concerned to preserve them from such a misfortune, and it will not permit any calamity to come upon them by which they may all perish. Still, some small misfortunes, and those for a short time, may befall them, so that they may appear to be brought low. But after that they will flourish again, to the terror of those who brought those mischiefs upon them. Therefore, if you wish to gain a victory over them for a short time, you will obtain it by following my directions. Set out the most beautiful of your daughters, those most eminent for beauty, and most able to force and conquer the modesty of those who behold them. Let them be adorned and dressed to the highest degree possible. Then send them near the camp and charge them that, when the young men of the Hebrews desire them, they should allow it. When they see that the young men are enamored of them, let them pretend to take their leave. If the men beg them to stay, let them not give their consent until they have persuaded them to abandon obedience to their own laws, and the worship of the God who established them, and to worship the gods of the Midianites. By this means God will be angry with them. Balak was very angry that the Israelites had not been cursed, and he sent Balaam away without considering him worthy of any honor. Then, when Balaam was just about to begin his journey to pass the Euphrates, he sent for Balak and for the princes of the Midianites and spoke these things to them. After Balaam had given them this counsel, he went his way. So when the Midianites sent their daughters, as Balaam had urged them to do, the Hebrew men were allured by their beauty. They came to the women, and begged them not to withhold the enjoyment of their beauty or deny them their company. These daughters of the Midianites gladly received their words, agreed to what they asked, and stayed with them. But after they had made the men fall in love with them, and their desire for them had fully ripened, the women began to think of leaving. Then the men became deeply distressed at the thought of the women's departure. They urged them not to leave, begged them to remain there and become their wives, and promised that the women would be treated as mistresses of everything they possessed. They said this with an oath, calling God as the judge of what they promised. They spoke with tears in their eyes, and with every sign of concern that might show how miserable they thought they would be without the women, and so might move the women to pity them. As soon as the women perceived that they had made the men their slaves and had caught them by their conversation, they began to speak to them. O illustrious young men, we have homes of our own, and there we have a great plenty of good things, together with parents and friends who are naturally affectionate toward us. We did not come to speak with you because we lacked any of these things, nor did we accept your invitation in order to sell the beauty of our bodies for gain. Rather, because we took you to be brave and worthy men, we agreed to your request so that we might treat you with the honors that hospitality requires. Now, since you say you have a great affection for us, and are troubled when you think we are leaving, we are not opposed to your entreaties. If we may receive such assurance of your goodwill as we think is alone sufficient, we will gladly spend our lives with you as your wives. But we are afraid that in time you will grow tired of our company, then abuse us and send us back to our parents in a disgraceful way. The women asked the men to excuse them for guarding against that danger. But the young men declared that they would give them any assurance they desired, and they did not contradict any of their requests, so great was their passion for them. Then the women said that, if this was truly their resolution, since the Hebrews used customs and a way of life entirely different from all other men, so that their kinds of food were peculiar to themselves, and their kinds of drink were not common to others, it would be absolutely necessary, if the men wanted them as wives, that they also worship the women's gods. They said there could be no other proof of the kindness the men claimed they already had, and promised to have in the future, than worshipping the same gods as they did. They asked what reason anyone had to complain if, now that the Hebrews had come into this country, they worshipped the proper gods of that country, especially since the women's gods were common to all people, while the Hebrews' God belonged to no one but themselves. So the women said the men must either adopt the same methods of divine worship as everyone else, or else look for another world where they could live by themselves according to their own laws. Because of the fondness they had for these women, the young men were persuaded to think that the women spoke very well. So they gave themselves up to what the women urged, transgressed their own laws, supposed that there were many gods, and resolved to sacrifice to them according to the laws of the country that ordained them. They delighted in the strange food, and went on doing everything the women wanted them to do, even though it contradicted their own laws. This transgression had already spread through the whole army of the young men, and they fell into a sedition much worse than the former one, and into danger of the entire abolition of their own institutions. Once the youth had tasted these strange customs, they pursued them with insatiable desires. Even some of the principal men, who were illustrious because of the virtues of their fathers, were corrupted along with the rest. Even Zimri, the head of the tribe of Simeon, was accompanied by a Midianitish woman who was the daughter of Sur, a man of authority in that country. When his wife urged him to disregard the laws of Moses and follow the customs she was used to, he complied with her, both by sacrificing in a manner different from his own and by taking a stranger as his wife. When matters stood this way, Moses feared that things would grow worse. He called the people together, but accused no one by name, because he did not want to drive into despair those who, while they remained concealed, might come to repentance. He said that by preferring pleasure to God, and to living according to God's will, they were not acting in a way worthy either of themselves or of their fathers. He said it was proper for them to change their course while their affairs were still in a good condition, and to understand that true fortitude did not consist in offering violence to their laws, but in resisting their lusts. He added that it was not reasonable for them, after living soberly in the wilderness, to act madly now that they were in prosperity, and that now, when they had abundance, they ought not to lose what they had gained when they had little. In this way he tried to correct the young men and bring them to repentance for what they had done. Yes, indeed, Moses, you are free to use such laws as you are so fond of, and by accustoming yourself to them you have made them firm. Otherwise, if things had not been this way, you would often have been punished before now, and you would have known that the Hebrews are not easily deceived. But you will not have me as one of the followers of your tyrannical commands. Up to now you have done nothing except, under the pretense of laws and of God, wickedly impose slavery on us and gain dominion for yourself, while you deprive us of the sweetness of life. That sweetness consists in acting according to our own wills, and it is the right of free men and of those who have no lord over them. Indeed, this man is harder on the Hebrews than the Egyptians themselves were, since he pretends to punish, according to his laws, everyone who does what is most pleasing to himself. But you yourself better deserve punishment, because you presume to abolish what everyone acknowledges to be good for him, and you aim to make your single opinion have more force than that of all the rest. What I now do, and what I think is right, I will not later deny to be according to my own judgment. I have married, as you rightly say, a strange woman, and you hear what I do from me myself as from one who is free, for truly I did not intend to hide myself. I also acknowledge that I sacrifice to those gods to whom you do not think it proper to sacrifice. I think it right to seek truth by inquiring of many people, and not, like one who lives under tyranny, to let the whole hope of my life depend on one man. Nor shall anyone who declares that he has more authority over my actions than I have myself find cause to rejoice. When Zimri had said these things about what he and some others had wickedly done, the people remained silent, both from fear of what might come upon them, and because they saw that their legislator was not willing to carry Zimri's insolence any further before the public or openly contend with him. Moses avoided doing so lest many imitate the impudence of Zimri's language, and thereby disturb the multitude. After this the assembly was dissolved. Yet the mischievous attempt would have gone further if Zimri had not first been killed, which happened on the following occasion. Phinehas was a man better than the rest of the young men in other respects, and he also surpassed his contemporaries in the dignity of his father, for he was the son of Eleazar, the high priest, and the grandson of Aaron, Moses' brother. He was greatly troubled by what Zimri had done. He resolved in earnest to punish him before his unworthy behavior should grow stronger through impunity, and in order to prevent this transgression from going further, which it would do if the ringleaders were not punished. Phinehas had such greatness of spirit, both in strength of mind and body, that whenever he undertook a very dangerous attempt, he did not abandon it until he had overcome it and gained a complete victory. So he went into Zimri's tent and killed him with his javelin, and with the same weapon he killed Cozbi also. Then all the young men who had regard for virtue and aimed to do a glorious action imitated the boldness of Phinehas, and killed those who were found guilty of the same crime as Zimri. Accordingly, many of those who had transgressed perished by the courageous valor of these young men. All the rest perished by a plague, a disease that God himself inflicted on them. God considered even those relatives who should have hindered them from such wicked actions, but instead persuaded them to go on, to be partners in their wickedness, and they died. At that time no fewer than 24,000 perished out of the army. This was why Moses was provoked to send an army to destroy the Midianites. We shall speak presently about that expedition after first relating what we have omitted. For it is only just not to pass over the praise due to our legislator for his conduct here. Although Balaam had been sent for by the Midianites to curse the Hebrews, and although he was prevented from doing so by divine providence, he still gave the Midianites advice by which our enemies nearly corrupted the whole multitude of the Hebrews with their wiles, until some of them were deeply infected with their opinions. Yet Moses did Balaam great honor by setting down his prophecies in writing. It was in Moses' power to claim this glory for himself and make people believe the predictions were his own, since there was no one who could testify against him and accuse him if he did so. Nevertheless, Moses still gave Balaam his attestation and honored him by making mention of him on this account. But let everyone think of these matters as he pleases. For the reasons already mentioned, Moses sent an army against the land of Midian. It numbered 12,000 men in all, with an equal number taken from every tribe. He appointed Phinehas as their commander, the same Phinehas mentioned a little before, who had guarded the laws of the Hebrews and had punished Zimri when he transgressed them. The Midianites knew beforehand that the Hebrews were coming and would soon be upon them. So they gathered their army together, fortified the entrances into their country, and waited there for the enemy to arrive. When the Hebrews came and joined battle with them, an immense multitude of the Midianites fell. They were so many that they could not be counted. Among them fell all their kings, 5 in number, Evi, Zur, Reba, Hur, and Rechem. Rechem had the same name as a city, the chief and capital of all Arabia, which the whole Arabian nation still calls Arisum from the name of the king who built it, though the Greeks call it Petra. When the enemies were defeated, the Hebrews spoiled their country, took great plunder, and destroyed the men who lived there, together with the women. Only the virgins they spared, as Moses had commanded Phinehas to do. Phinehas returned with an army that had suffered no harm and with a great quantity of spoil, 52,000 beeves, 75,600 sheep, 60,000 asses, and an immense amount of gold and silver furniture, which the Midianites used in their houses, for they were so wealthy that they lived very luxuriously. About 32,000 virgins were also led captive. Moses divided the prey into portions. He gave 1/50th part to Eleazar and the 2 priests, another 50th part to the Levites, and distributed the rest of the prey among the people. After this they lived happily, having obtained an abundance of good things by their courage, with no misfortune attending them or preventing them from enjoying that happiness. Moses had now grown old, and he appointed Joshua as his successor, both to receive directions from God as a prophet and to serve as commander of the army if they should ever need one. This was done by the command of God, so that the care of the public might be committed to Joshua. Joshua had been instructed in every kind of learning that concerned the laws and God himself, and Moses had been his teacher. At this time the 2 tribes of Gad and Reuben, together with the half-tribe of Manasseh, had great numbers of cattle, as well as all other kinds of prosperity. Because of this, they held a meeting and came together to ask Moses to give them, as their own particular portion, the land of the Amorites that they had taken by right of war, because it was fruitful and good for feeding cattle. But Moses supposed that they were afraid to fight the Canaanites, and had invented this concern for their cattle as a respectable excuse for avoiding that war. He called them outright cowards, and said they had only devised a decent excuse for their cowardice. He said they wanted to live in luxury and ease while all the rest were laboring with great pains to obtain the land they desired, and that they were unwilling to march on and endure the remaining hard service by which, under the divine promise, they were to cross Jordan, overcome the enemies God had shown them, and obtain their land. When these tribes saw that Moses was angry with them, and when they could not deny that he had just cause to be displeased at their request, they made an apology for themselves. They said that they had made this request not because they feared dangers, and not because they were lazy, but so that they could leave the plunder they had gained in safe places, and thereby be quicker and readier to undergo hardships and fight battles. They added that, if Moses would give them the land, they would build cities there where they could preserve their children, wives, and possessions, and then they would go along with the rest of the army. Moses was pleased with what they said. So he called for Eleazar the high priest Joshua, and the chiefs of the tribes, and permitted these tribes to possess the land of the Amorites, but on the condition that they join their kinsmen in the war until everything was settled. On that condition they took possession of the country, built strong cities for themselves, and placed in them their children, their wives, and everything else they had that might hinder the labors of their future marches. Moses also now built 10 cities that were to be included among the 48 cities for the Levites. Of these he assigned 3 to those who killed any person involuntarily and fled to them. He fixed the length of their banishment to match the life of the high priest under whom the killing and the flight happened. After that high priest died, Moses allowed the manslayer to return home. During the time of exile, The relatives of the person who had been killed were permitted by this law to kill the manslayer if they caught him outside the boundaries of the city to which he had fled, though this permission was not granted to anyone else. The cities set apart for this flight were these: Bezer on the borders of Arabia, Ramoth in the land of Gilead, and Golan in the land of Bashan. Moses also commanded that 3 other cities from the cities of the Levites should be assigned as dwelling places for these fugitives, but not until after they came into possession of the land of Canaan. At this time the chief men of the tribe of Manasseh came to Moses and informed him that an eminent man of their tribe had died. His name was Zelophehad. He had left no male children, but had left daughters. They asked Moses whether these daughters might inherit his land or not. Moses answered that if the daughters married within their own tribe, they would carry their estate with them, but if they gave themselves in marriage to men of another tribe, they must leave their inheritance in their father's tribe. Then Moses ordained that every person's inheritance should remain in his own tribe.
And we will halt there, with Midian beaten, Balaam dead among the men he advised, and Israel camped on the plains of Moab with the Jordan and the Promised Land in plain sight to cross the water. Everything now points to one thing: the crossing. But the man who led them out of Egypt and through 40 years of desert will not cross with them. Before he dies, Moses has a great deal to say. Next time, in part 3, Moses gathers the whole nation and gives them his parting gift, the constitution of their commonwealth and the entire body of their laws, set down so they might outlive him. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly.